I finished my PhD. I go to Harvard. I join this great research team, do this wonderful postdoc on HIV vaccine development. And it's really fun. And you said it in your intro. We were working on DNA vaccines 25 years ago, which is really interesting because, as you know, what got us out of the pandemic, DNA and RNA vaccines. So I'm doing all this stuff and I'm winding down my postdoctoral fellowship, and I'm thinking, well, what do I do next? And a colleague literally said, have you thought about intellectual property, being a technology specialist? Now here I am, McGill, Harvard, bachelor's, PhDs, winning all kinds of awards. I was like, what's a technology specialist? Like I had no idea what they were talking about.
Hello, I'm Bruce Berman, the host of Understanding IP Matters, the critically acclaimed podcast series that provides leading innovators and experts a space to share their IP story. Learn firsthand about the strengths and weaknesses of copyrights, patents, trademarks, and trade secrets as they adapt to an AI-driven world. This is our 4th season. Frederick Bertley is a scientist, educator, and advocate of innovative thinking. He is president and CEO of COSI, the Center of Science and Industry, the #1 ranked science and education center in the nation. Dr. B, as he is known, is an advocate for democratizing access to STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, which he and COSI accomplished through a series of unique programs. Recipient of 9 Emmy Awards for his PBS-affiliated series, QED with Dr. B, and an animated series, Dr. B and 3, he believes that familiarity with IP rights is a component of STEAM success. Dr. Bertley holds degrees in physiology, mathematics, and the history of science, as well as a PhD in immunology from McGill University. His postdoctoral fellowship was at Harvard Medical School, where he worked on development of DNA vaccines for HIV/AIDS. His global health work includes preventative medicine and basic vaccines in Haiti, Sudan, and the Canadian Arctic. Before joining COSI, Dr. Bertley served as Senior Vice President for Science and Education at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. Earlier in his career, he spent 3 years as a technology specialist for the IP group at WilmerHale, where he prosecuted patents, analyzed and drafted claim construction, and performed freedom to operate studies. It's a pleasure and an honor, really, to have you here. Good morning, Dr. Bertley. We have never had a 9-time Emmy Award winner and a PhD in immunology.
Well, Dr. Berman, it's an absolute pleasure to be on your show. I'm really excited to share all the wonderful things about IP and beyond. But thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Because he insists on calling me Dr. Berman, even though I didn't complete my dissertation at Columbia, I'll let him do it, but I just want to put an asterisk there.
Hey, well earned, well deserved, sir. You did the work.
I did the work and more, if you ask me. So let's get right into it. IP rights, like patents and copyrights, they're not typically a part of the STEM or STEAM discussion. Why do you think that's the case?
It's funny you say that. And the other reason why I like to call you Dr. Berman is because now I get to say Dr. B gets to speak to the other Dr. B. So this is terrific. You really led off with one of the most important things in education, which is just frankly shocking to me. And that's in kindergarten through grade 12, we don't teach any IP. This is in the US, Canada, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia. Anywhere in the regular school system, they do not teach intellectual property. Then you go to college, they do not teach you intellectual property. You can go on and get a PhD, they still don't teach you intellectual property. The only time you learn IP in any real academic setting is if you go to law school, which is generally 3 years in most countries. You get 1 semester in year 3 where they introduce you to this topic called intellectual property. For me, it's shocking because the entire world, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, you, sir, but for your audience, the entire world is not tangentially, not kind of, sort of, is 100% dependent on IP. Every single invention, every single brand, every single thing written. This is copyrights, trademarks, and patents, and that moves the planet forward. Economies are built around that. Banking is built around that. Everything is built on IP, yet we don't teach it. Now, the question of why, that's a $1 million question, and you can get a lot smarter people on me on your show to answer that. I don't know why we don't. I know that's why myself, you, and a bunch of other organizations we know have now specialty programs to share the wonders and importance of IP. We have brains, 8 million people on the planet. We have our ideas.
The framers in the U.S. put it, the founding fathers, into the Constitution, it's right there. Article 1.
Well, and hence the birth of USPTO later on.
Yeah, because they got it, even though they weren't creators themselves, or most of them were. Jefferson was. But yeah, and even in law school, I'm told it's not that well taught. IP agnostics or IP doubters teach IP sometimes in law school, and that's not exactly healthy either. COSI and its programs are not unlike other organizations. Tell us how they differ.
Yeah, great question. So COSI, which stands for the Center of Science and Industry in Columbus, Ohio, and proud to say we were ranked the number one science museum in the country 4 years in a row, according to USA Today. So that's just pretty fun. But what we are is a science museum. Most major cities has a science museum. You know, you buy a ticket, you go in there, and you can press a button, pull a lever, have some sciencey engineering experience. So we do that. You know, you got exhibits, you got planetariums, you got stage shows. One of the things we realized, or at least I realized early in my tenure, is that museums are interesting constructs, right? They started way back in Babylonian period, fast forward to like, the Romans, and then you get into like the medieval period, and then 18th, 17th and 18th centuries when they really blossomed through Europe as buildings that have stuff, because the average person doesn't have cool art or cool things or cool documents, So they built these buildings called museums. They would put stuff in there, and then you get to go there and buy a ticket or for free and have that experience and go back home. It made sense all the way up to about the 1950s and into the 1980s and 90s. But now we all have these devices, these computers in our pocket that have democratized access to information. As long as you have some type of web service, you have an instant access to the modern day Alexandria called Google, and you can find out anything about anything. All of this to say, at COSI, we decided that, hey, we think science is important. We think STEAM, as you said in the intro remarks, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math is important. We don't want to make everybody a PhD scientist, but we do want people to raise their science literacy. So if we're good about that, we should be able to do stuff and develop programs that are building independent, because as more technology becomes available, as more things are accessible by your thumbs and your little screen, you're less likely to spend a whole lot of money to go to a museum. And so we started doing programs that are independent of the museum. A science festival. That's not at our building. That's in 21 communities around Columbus over 4 days. We have our intellectual property program called EPIC, where we go out to schools, community centers, industries, and share the wonders of intellectual property. We made a TV show, QED with Dr. B, who referenced it as one of the Emmy-winning shows we do. That's not at our building. That's with PBS. That's on TV. We have an animated series. We have a program called Science Meets Society. This is where, again, not at our building, we go into communities, synagogues, churches, restaurants, bars, and we hold these conversations. So we created this program called Science Meets Society. We'll go out in the community and we have these intimate sessions, 50 to 100 people with a world-class expert on a given topic, and the audience gets to ask them in a safe space where nobody's going to laugh at them, nobody's going to make fun of their questions, and they can do a deep dive and learn. So all of this to say, we've learned that, yes, we want people to buy a ticket and come to our building, but if we're going to survive and thrive in the next few decades, we have to have a brand that's commensurate with science awareness, science learning, and we want to make sure that people can access that where they live, learn, and lounge. Other museums do community programs too, but we've taken it to a whole other level, and now we do it in 21 different states in the U.S. and 10 different countries around the world.
I'm curious, Dr. B, as I may call you. Dr. B, is that okay?
Absolutely, Dr. B. You can call me Dr. B.
I'm curious about your background. How did you come to science and education, as an immunologist?
Yeah, so my parents are from the Caribbean. My dad is born and raised in Trinidad, and my mother was born and raised in Barbados. And they were so the British colonies all actually followed the British education system, which is O level, which stands for ordinary level. That goes like up to grade 12, our equivalent of grade 12. And then A level, which stands for advanced level. And that's the equivalent of AP courses that we have here. And believe it or not, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and before that, they would actually ship the exams from Cambridge, England. So all the English-speaking islands, Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, you name it, and they would administer the exams to the kids for the O levels and A levels at the end of each year. They would literally put the exams back on a boat and then later back on airplanes, back to Mother England. They would grade them and they'd give you your score. And if you did really well, if you were at the top of the grades, you would get something called the Island Scholarship. So my parents were Island Scholars. And what that meant is you could pick Oxford or Cambridge in England. You could pick Harvard or Yale in the US, or you could pick McGill University in Canada. And so my parents didn't know each other. They went from their respective islands, met in McGill University in Montreal, and there they were. So I was born in Canada, and I like to say there are four of us. I'm the oops baby's younger brother. So I was really oops by the time I came out. But I grew up in a house where my parents just exposed us to everything. I mean, they were academics, so we were definitely schooly and bookish kids. I wasn't a great reader, but overall we were very kind of schooly kids. We just kind of came easy to us. But I did a lot of other things. I like to experiment, play around, played a lot of sports. But then I had this video game that I wanted to buy. All my friends had this video game. I'm dating myself, but it was one of the first handheld video games. It's called Coleco Head-to-Head Football. I don't know if you know, but if you Google it, you'll see the image and it might bring back some fond memories. Anyway, it took those square batteries, the kinds that we stick out our tongue and
transistor radio batteries, right?
Transistor radio batteries. That's exactly right. And so, the games were very energy efficient, so it burned through the batteries. I didn't have a lot of money, so I couldn't keep buying batteries. So I did what I thought was a smart idea. I went downstairs in the basement. I found the old lamp. I cut off the plug of the lamp, and I opened the back where the batteries are. There's a red and black wire, connected the wire, and I plugged it in to the wall. And I kid you not, the game worked. It was the best 10 seconds of my life. The 11th second, my game literally got charred. My game got fried. The outlet got charred, and I ruined my game. But while getting over that and being horrified that I ruined this game, I begged my parents to allow me to buy for my paper route money. I realized that this thing called electricity, that as a kid I was taking for granted. You flick on a switch and it's there, lights are there, and you plug something out. And I realized, wait a minute, there's something way more magical happening behind that wall. And that, Dr. Berman, is literally what got me really curious into the science and wanting to learn about nature and natural phenomena, and that got hooked. And so fast forward, you said what I did in undergrad. I did mathematics and history of science and physiology, then went on to do a PhD. But always that spark, that aha moment that people talk about. I literally had mine as a youngster, 9, 10 years old, blowing up my cherished game.
I'm curious about what did you learn from your experience prosecuting patents at Hale and Dorr, and what attracted you to that job?
Well, so that's a great question. So again, as I mentioned, we don't learn about this. Like, I had a PhD and knew nothing about IP, right? The only time you learn as a scientist is if you actually develop a drug or something where all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, what do I do with this? And then there's this whole thing called the tech transfer division in the university. And they hit you with like 4 IP lawyers and they start telling you all this stuff. And you learn really quick about the process. But prior to that, I had no idea about this. And so I finished my PhD. I go to Harvard. I joined this great research team, do this wonderful postdoc on HIV vaccine development. And it's really fun. And you said it in your intro. We were working on DNA vaccines 25 years ago, which is really interesting because, as you know, what got us out of the pandemic, DNA and RNA vaccines. But anyway, so I'm doing all this stuff and I'm winding down my postdoctoral fellowship, and I'm thinking, well, what do I do next? And a colleague literally said, have you thought about, intellectual property, being a technology specialist? Now here I am, McGill, Harvard, bachelor's, PhDs, winning all kind of awards. I was like, what's a technology specialist? I had no idea what they were talking about. So the patents actually have to be drafted by attorneys to, do all this stuff. Well, the problem is the attorney has no idea if Dr. Berman's breast cancer drug is good, if so-and-so's incredible invention has any engineering or scientific merits, because they're a lawyer and most of them don't know the science or engineering. So back in the day, in like the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, they would hire doctors or engineers or scientists as consultants to help them do the analysis on said person's invention. So much money in it, they started hiring people with PhDs or MDs, putting them in-house in the law firm. You mentioned Hale and Dorr, giving you a stush office. You have an assistant. Like, I'm finishing a postdoc and I have this assistant that's almost twice my age, and I've never had an assistant or secretary ever, and they pay you they pay you handsomely, and you work with the attorneys and you do everything except for officially submitting the patent, because those are signed off by the lawyer. So to your point, you do freedom to operate studies. That's just figuring out, okay, before you even file a patent, has anybody else done this stuff? Are there competing interests out there, etc.? Then you learn how to write claims. You learn about that whole process. Then you learn how to how to argue it or how to prosecute it is the actual term with the governing body. In this case, in the US, it's the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Sometimes you're working with WIPO, the World Intellectual Patent Office, if you want to file beyond the United States. And so you're learning all these skills. So for me, it was drinking from a fire hose, but really exciting because it was this whole ecosystem that I knew nothing about. And tangentially, and this is for me at least one of the most important things, tangentially is connected to business development and entrepreneurship. So I knew nothing about venture capital. I knew nothing about angel funding. I knew nothing about how to start a company. But by virtue of working in this field of intellectual property, I got exposed to that whole other space. And that's when I was like, this stuff is really important. And I want to be part of a community that tries to showcase this for a broader audience.
Most people's first exposure to IP is not always so positive. They get burned some way, or scientist says, well, I developed something and now I need to, do something with it. But, I didn't file the patents early enough, or I filed them incorrectly, or, it's a learning process for a lot of entrepreneurs. They don't always know.
100%. And there's two big things. One is because there's so much money in your IP, in your invention or whatever you're coming up with, that there's so many people who can compete. So, we as scientists pride ourselves to going to conferences. What do you do at a conference? You have an abstract or a poster, or you give an oral presentation. Well, there are people taking notes, and they might go back and work on it faster than you. And so if they file first, even though you came up with this thing, if they filed first, were first to file, they will have the IP rights. So that's one of the painful things that people have gone through. The other painful part about it, and I love that you asked this question, is because you never did this your whole life, it's not intuitive. The rules and regulations from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and frankly, every country's, it's so meticulously, pedantically painful. And so if you come in as an artist with a brand and a logo, or you come in, which is, copyrights and trademarks aren't nearly as hard in terms of the pain points of it, at least. But when you're coming with an invention, and the and the comma, if you put it in, you might win your claim. If you don't have it, the and, like, it is unbelievable. So especially scientists and engineers, their first go at a patent, the first few forays can be very painful.
So once they asked me, how'd you get involved from the film scholarship to getting involved with the IP world? But it's strangely the same in that despite all the specificity in a photograph or a film, there's a lot of detail, 10,000 words or more in a shot. There's a lot of specificity in a patent. But despite that, you still need a frame around it. The specificity doesn't guarantee you anything. 100% of something. It's like a mining claim. That's how it was explained to me at Kenyon years ago. It's like a mining claim. You stake it too broadly, you can't defend it. You stake it too narrowly, you don't own anything. Do you have any patents of your own?
I don't have any patents, but I do have some copyrights, trademarks. One trademark that I do have is for another program called The Color of Science. And that program is really just to showcase that the scientists come in all shapes and sizes and colors. And so they're not always, old men with thick glasses and pocket protectors, but that women make fantastic scientists and engineers. So do persons of color, members of the LGBTQ plus community, etc. And so that Color of Science program, I own the trademarks to that, but I do not own any patents. Even the HIV vaccine stuff that we've done, I mean, a lot of that stuff is finally getting to the place of filing for certain patents. So we'll see what happens. But I do not own, as of now, I do not own a patent.
You wear several hats. You're an immunologist, you're an IP professional. What's it like to produce Emmy Award-winning TV? That's a different skill set. How did you get into that, and what is that like?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So being a scientist, one of my biggest frustrations is the growing. So not only does it exist, but the growing science illiteracy in the US, in Canada, and Europe, and much of the world, right? And there we can get into why that's the case.
The developed world you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. First world, first nation. Oh, yeah. In fact, you go to some developing countries, they're all over it. They don't have the resources, but they're dying to learn. Absolutely. So what I realized is there are many reasons for it, and we can talk about that. Hopefully you'll invite me back. We can talk about what's going on with science literacy in America. But there are many reasons. But one of the reasons is the average person is turned off of science. And the average person is turned off of science, not exclusively, but partly because a lot of us, my tribe, likes to speak in a language that's highfalutin, a vocabulary that 12 other people around the world understand. We think that makes us smarter, and everybody else is, pardon the expression, but dumb or not as bright as us, etc. Well, that's intimidating to the average person. And so we make it sound super complex. And I'm not belittling science. There are some very complex things, obviously, in science and engineering. But the fact of the matter is, science is so exciting. Engineering and tinkering is so exciting. So if you can explain and communicate science in an exciting, engaging way, not only are you not going to turn off the average person, you're going to excite them. The joke about it is babies are born scientists. They're born curious. That's how you learn to talk, walk. Everything is an experiment. Pilot, test, and learn. I do this. I cry. Oh, my mom's coming. I cry again. Oh, it's coming. Well, that works. When my butt's wet in my diaper, I know crying works. Like, these are all scientific processes. So we're born that. A lot of the school systems, especially in the developed nation, kind of bleed that out of you, and it's all about rote memory and learn this stuff and do it this way and da da da. And oh, by the way, don't work with the person sitting at the desk next to you. That's cheating. You got to do everything on your own. Meanwhile, how does the world work when you're an engineer or you're a scientist? Everybody's working in teams and groups. So it's a combination of a not such a great school system, us scientists speaking a vocabulary and try to intimidate the rest of the world. And so I said, you know what? I'm not the answer, but I want to be part of a community that tries to turn that on its head. And so one of the things we want to do is make science exciting. All of this gets to your question about making Emmy Award-winning programs. We realize that science is cool. So let's communicate it. Everybody loves a good story. Everybody loves stories. Let's find a good way to communicate it. Let's lift up these great scientists and inventors and the stuff we're doing, but in an exciting way to engage the crowd. And so we have a TV show with PBS. That's a 30-minute primetime television show where I go around the country interviewing scientists and engineers. And because I'm a scientist on one side, but I also work in a science communication space, like a science museum on the other side, I can wear both hats and take some of their complex stuff, bring it down to earth without making it feel dumb, but just making it more accessible and then having fun with it. And so that's what's really well. And what's great about that is, the Emmys, which recognize really good television and video creativity, have decided that science communication is something they want to support. And if they see institutions or individuals that are doing a good job with that, they're going to award you with an Emmy. And that's why we're most proud. And so we did the TV show, which is a half hour, but we also knew that people have a short attention span. So we also created this animated series called Dr. B in 3. These are 3-minute videos, 100% animated, all done in-house with myself and our team.
I mean, 3-minute, that's the long form, right?
Right, I know. So 3 minutes today is the long form. I know. We're trying to get into 10-second TikTok videos. You nailed it. Even 3 minutes is now considered long form.
That's really cool. And you have the IP depth too to add to that, which is really, exciting to me because a lot of folks, they're good science educators. I think Alan Alda has a whole program at Stony Brook with regard to science communications.
I really respect him because he's one of the first. I mean, Morgan Freeman does some shows now, a few other people do it, but he's one of the first big celebrities, that wasn't a scientist himself that said, what, we need to shine a light on this. And so I really appreciate him. I guess all those years of filming MASH, he actually became a doctor.
Well, not only that, he was in, I don't know if you recall, Flash of Genius about the Robert Kearns intermittent windshield wiper. He's in that movie and he plays a lawyer who basically says he's not a bad guy or a good guy. He basically says, you got to settle because you're not going to go any further with this. You're never going to win, which he was right, of course. It's never been a completely level playing field in IP, especially patents, but in IP in general. But the U.S. has done a remarkably good job, from the founding fathers. And, with persistence, entrepreneurs, individuals, small companies, they can succeed. It seems to be a less level playing field for poor people and people of color. Making IP rights more certain would seem to be better for innovation, small companies, and individuals. What's your thinking about that?
You absolutely framed it perfectly up to about 2010 and certainly 2015 and beyond. And I say that only because Moore's law is absolutely in practice every 18 months. There's new development, new technology. Things are changing so rapidly that now there are people, and we have the richest person in the world who proved positive the concept. There are people who don't worry about filing patents anymore because the process to get a patent from filing to actual issuing is about 2.5 years on average. Sometimes it can take 5, 7 years. If you're lucky, a year and a half, but that almost never happens. And because technology today, we're no longer hopping on a boat, sailing across from Canada, the US to Europe, and you got those 3 weeks. No, things are instant around the world. And because of that, how fast technology is changing, people aren't even wasting, a lot of people aren't wasting their time and money and pain process to go through to get a patent. They'll just produce the stuff because you can make whatever. You don't need a patent to produce your product. In fact, a lot of people don't even understand that.
If you're involved in internet, e-commerce, or software, you don't need a patent. In most cases. I mean, you can have it, but it's going to be a heck of a time to enforce it if it's infringed, if you can prove the infringement.
That's right. And while you're waiting 2 or 3 years to go back and forth with the USPTO or World Intellectual Property Office to get your patent issue, that 1 to 2 to 3 years, your competitor is working hardcore and they may beat you. You may end up getting a patent, but they may beat you to the market and sell their widgets and make their 10 billion long before you get your patent issue. So today, it's actually started to shift. And, Elon Musk again proved it, right? I mean, he doesn't worry about filing patents. He's like, go ahead, here's all my stuff. And he says, try to make it.
He opened some of the patents of Tesla up to, license free, it's available. But, that developed the industry. But I understand the battery patents, the most valuable ones, he kind of kept to the side. I don't know how accurate that is, but that's what I've heard.
Well, he definitely has patents. I'm not suggesting Elon Musk does not have patents and doesn't understand the value of IP. I'm just saying there's a lot of stuff that he put up open source and things he doesn't even file for, which is just outstanding.
Right. Given the industry, some of the industries, software related stuff is just really difficult. There are several bills, bouncing around Congress that may restore some teeth to the patent system, and hopefully there's a push, rightly so, of course, for people of color to take advantage of the patent system, understand it. But when the system is weakened, it's weakened for everyone. If patents are weak, and they can't be relied upon, or copyrights for that matter, with AI, then it really affects everyone. I think that's overlooked.
Well, and you know this better than me. Law is a lagger. It's unfortunately a lagging indicator, not a prescient or forward-thinking indicator. And so the laws and stuff just aren't up to speed with how fast we move. I mean, you talked about AI, right? And copyrights. I mean, AI is just blowing IP out, period, out the water to have to reframe how we think about this, right? Who's inventing what? Who's the owner? Who's the assignee when you're using technology to do what, quote unquote, we humans used to do? So it's really complicated. To your point, the fields, the fields being level, ebb and flow. I mean, I just feel like, and I'm not an expert historian, but I just feel like the playing fields are never level. And then what happens with time? Okay, they slowly get to be level. And then, there's some other discovery that makes them not level again. And the haves have them, the have-nots don't. And then it takes time for them to level. And then there's another one. So, I just think that ebbs and flows. I will say this. Because of technology, things are more democratized. I think of some of my colleagues in some of the toughest places on the planet, and they can pull out a mobile phone with Wi-Fi and surf the internet, and they may not have running water. It's just mind-blowing. The fact that information is not perfect, but information is almost ubiquitously accessible now, that has helped. Because remember back in the day, you had the library, right? Like the rich people had the library, had the encyclopedias, Britannicas, and then had this and that, and if you're lucky, okay, you go to school, but the private schools had better resources than the public schools. Well, today, the biggest resource for any information is the internet. Period.
Make sure the information is accurate.
Well, that's why science literacy is important. It's not about learning the facts. It's learning how to mine through information and how to ask questions and distill the good stuff from the noise. How do you know how to look for a reference? How do you know how to look, like all these things? That's part of kind of the scientific whole kind of framework of how we think about processing information. So you're absolutely right, because there's so much content out there.
There's a group called the NAMLI, National Association of Media Literacy Educators. It's like 10,000 members, and they focus on media literacy. It's a good group, and they touch upon IP occasionally. I try to get them to, at least. Ironically, some of their supporters are some of the folks that may contribute to media illiteracy, if you know what I mean. But that's a balancing act that, I appreciate. They're a nonprofit. They have to do that. As you know, we produce this podcast, the Center for IP Understanding. We promote a general level of understanding of IP. That's what we talk about and the reasons why. But it seems to me there's a lot of focus on organizations, maybe COSI as well, on inventor education. Everybody wants to get to the next generation of future inventors, and that's important. It needs to be done, and they need to understand before they get burned or get involved in the wrong situation how the system works. But if the general public and investors and policymakers are hostile to IP rights, don't understand them, don't understand where they fit in, who they help, what they're for, that's dangerous too.
Well, first of all, 100%. Just like I say with science literacy, everybody does not need to be a PhD neuroscientist or a PhD astrophysicist, but people should know what physics is. People should know what neuroscience is, right? So I agree with you. Everybody should have some understanding of IP at a basal level, for sure. The inventor thing for me is interesting, though, because there's inventors slash inventions, but then there's intellectual property, right? If you have a patent, then you invented something. But you can be an inventor and not care about IP at all, right? And so back to your policymakers and the business folks in the like at the end of the day, business wants to make a dollar. And if your invention is good, people will find a way to make a dollar from it. Now, it might not be you who makes the dollar, right? That's a whole other thing. But I think the movement, if I can use that strong M word, with places like COSI, places like K through 12 spaces, after school programs, and then you look at places like the Bill Gates Melinda Foundation, look at Intel and all these big companies. The push towards that whole invention convention, and let's get the middle school kids and high schools to think about inventing. I think the point there, well, not the point, a point certainly in all of that, is society moves forward, not exclusively, but definitely dependent on technology. Right. And we just want to make sure, back to your point about democratizing access, genius knows no zip code, knows no religion, knows no gender. And so you might have that rich white kid who might be a great inventor, but you might have that poor Puerto Rican kid in some Bronx, distressed community that might have an amazing mind. So how do we make sure they have a chance to learn about a little bit of science, a little bit of engineering, and learn about, hey, you have a brain. You might be able to invent the next cool thing. So yes, it's connected to IP, but I think the driving force is less IP and more so we want to make sure that as best as possible, we're identifying the girls who become women, amazing scientists and engineers, the Black and brown folks, etc., so that we maximize the capacity of this great nation, maximizing the capacity to invent great things like cures for diseases that hurt our loved ones and everything else that we're trying to do. So I appreciate that push. But back to you, and I love how you framed it, back to your not level playing field. You can say that all day to an underserved community, a distressed school system, but if they don't have resources, it just becomes a lot of, oh, you can do this too, but you don't have a computer, you don't have a lab to do it, you don't have, an engineering space, you don't have a what do you call it, maker space.
You didn't have breakfast.
Oh, you know what? Thank you for saying that. You don't even have breakfast, and you may not even have a proper roof over your head. You're absolutely right. So there's a little, I don't want to say emperor wears no clothes. It's not that dramatic, but hey, talk about invention, but please throw some resources or help them identify resources to make it viable.
What would you say are the greatest challenges to teaching STEAM or conveying the importance of it? Should it be part of a typical K through 12 curriculum?
That's a great question. I'm going to cheat on my answer. And I'm a scientist, I'm a STEAM, professional. So obviously I'm passionate about it. I think the bigger problem is we don't value education at all. Like I spent a lot of time in India and Pakistan, and those folks, the classroom could be a dirt floor, a teacher with 50 kids. Teacher might have some chalk with a tiny little chalkboard, but those kids are voraciously studying and learning everything they can. And that teacher is like a god to them. In America and Canada and much of Europe, we don't value education like that. I love sports. I'm a huge sports fan, right? I love basketball, football, baseball. I love hockey. Growing up in Canada, of course, I love hockey. Imagine if you can dribble a piece of leather or throw a piece of pigskin down the field, you might get $20 million a year. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't. I'll leave that to the market, the sport market for us to generate that. But you're teaching K through 12. You're teaching the people that are going to be the leaders of the country, or at least the adults of the country. And you're doing that, 9 months a year, and you're getting $40,000 a year. We don't value education the same way we value other things. And so, yes, back to your question about STEM. STEM is, has some additional things because the sciencey people are pushed away from science. But the bigger issue is and I'm generalizing, there's some fantastic individual schools in this country. I'm not at all suggesting they're not. And we know how to teach really well as well. But holistically, the lion's share of Americans or people who live in this great country are educated in underserved private schools with underserved teachers who aren't served from a resource standpoint, and teachers who might not be the best teachers, period, because they have that expression, oh, you can't be an engineer, you can't be a doctor, oh, just become a teacher. If we hire teachers like we draft basketball players and football players and baseball players, and you had these killer teachers in the room, everybody would want to be the next Shakespeare, Maya Angelou, or Albert Einstein, or Marie Curie, right? Because you're just so excited. We're just not there. So the bigger problem is, how do we fix / double down on elevating our overall education system?
My daughter happens to be a special ed teacher. I know that world well. Artificial intelligence, the question of scraping and fakes and infringement, copyright could be the canary in the coal mine for broader IP understanding. Because as you know, everyone holds the copyright. We're not always aware that we have copyright, but we do. If you want to enforce it, you have to have it filed. But I think AI has stuck a little pin in people and say, well, what about this stuff? Who owns this? And how's it being used? And is it being changed? What do you think that AI is going to achieve for us, aside from giving us better access? But what are the good and bad aspects of AI as you see it?
Well, Samuel Clemens, otherwise known as Mark Twain, has one of the best quotes. We don't invent anything. We recycle what came before us. And so my whole thing with AI, and I recognize it as an invaluable tool, and by the way, AI, as you know, is 75 years old.
You know that Twain was an avid inventor himself.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, he's multi-talented individual. Obviously, we know about generative AI. But the fact of the matter is, we humans have had tools we've been using for the longest while that help us do stuff. Right? You're a musician. Well, have you used a synthesizer? Right? I mean, you're synthesizing music, right? Some of the music that's made the most money. It's not the classical guitar and a drummer. It's like synthesized music and computer aided music. And now you're making, just ask Dr. Drake about who makes his beats and how he gets up, right? And so we have this whole kind of history of boring. You look at artists. Picasso used to talk about that in some of his memoirs, that he went to Africa, he went all over Europe, he went different places, and he learned other people's techniques and incorporated it into his own. We've been doing that all the time. And then you fast forward technology. Okay, you got a word processor. Well, at first the word processor was just about, did you spell the word wrong and you got the squiggly line? Well, then now you got these blue lines that actually look at your grammar. Then you got these green lines that actually suggest to you a way of rewording that sentence. No one is worrying about copywriting that essay or that book and short story. Now we throw in AI and it's like this whole, oh my gosh. And so to your point, it is going to be crazy in terms of how the lawmakers dissect this and figure it out. But I submit that, yes, generative AI is a next level form. I understand that. I know quite a bit about it. I've done television shows on it. The fact of the matter is, we humans have been using tools, sharper pencils, for decades, if not centuries, that aid us to produce X. And so really, what's the difference? Now, if someone said the computer grew little legs and turned itself on and produced something and voila, it's on your desk and you picked it up and you filed for it as a patent, well, that's a little weird. But no, the computer is a tool. You still have to come up with the prompts. It matters what prompts you put in. Well, you're the author of those prompts. You're the author of the next question after the prompt. That's all you. So yeah, you're getting this smarter, faster, better computer that can pull from a bigger database and put stuff and associate stuff faster, but you still came up with it and you told it to do it.
Sure, but Dr. B, does the prompt owned by the individual, the company, the AI company, OpenAI, or the individual that may have developed something from your prompt?
Well, no. Sorry. So let's make sure we're using the same vocabulary. When I say prompt, I mean you as the user of generative AI of ChatGPT, for example. ChatGPT is software. You are putting stuff into that. So you are putting in those prompts, those questions, whatever. Now, the person, whether it's Sam Altman or whoever generated, whoever created ChatGPT, well, they should be able to file for patents for their tool. But when you're using that tool, just like you use a wrench to loosen your motor and then you change the motor and you put back the bolt, that wrench doesn't get any ownership. That wrench doesn't get any value. It was a tool that was used. You still had to build the motor. So for me, these chatbots exist, and whoever created those chatbots, yes, they should get the rights for the technology, the chatbot, but it doesn't mean that if the chatbot produced something because you created the chatbot, you get it. You didn't give the prompt for that chatbot to come up with the product.
But if you did give the prompt to come up with it, is that then now owned by the chat GPT or whomever? Is that now theirs, even though you came up with it? The question is, can you protect a prompt? If you ask the right questions, that's half the battle, right?
So if you're a painter, right, the equivalent of the prompt for a painter is what's in their mind. Then they start mixing paints and they start throwing some stuff on a canvas. But the prompt was, I want to paint a beautiful scenery, or I want to do a portrait. Like, the prompt is going on in their head. Look, I'm not trying to simplify it because it is very complex, but I'm not on this whole nervous bandwagon that, well, you shouldn't own the IP if you use AI to help you get to the finish line. I view it as a sharper, better tool.
A lot of people do. I do as well. You've spent a lot of time in Africa and other parts of the world. You talked a little bit about this, of doing research and developing STEAM programs. What do you see as the opportunities for various parts of the world with regard to IP and education?
From an education standpoint, one of the things about participating in education programs in the Caribbean and, well, Europe, South America, but the Caribbean, places like Southeast Asia, like India, Pakistan, is you immediately see the difference between the US and Canada and Europe to much of the rest of the world. When I say we, US, Canada, we need to wake up, because the average person, especially if you're talking about education, so kids K through 12, the average kiddo in some of these quote unquote underserved countries or under-resourced countries are in such a different space with eagerness to learn, work ethic to learn, and motivation to keep it moving and better themselves. Compared to our very complacent, I'm generalizing now, compared to our very complacent American, US-based population or Canadian-based population where, we're okay with things and we keep it moving. And so I do the work internationally just because I believe every kiddo, education for me is the liberator and to use your words, is the equalizer and the democratizer of a chance of having a prosperous life. And so I think every kiddo should have that opportunity. And so if I can be in Brooklyn, Boston, or Botswana or Barbados, and I can help kiddos, I'm going to, try to be part of that. But for me, the rhyming couplet or the thesis is, whoa, I bring back stuff here to the US and I try to double down on this country because I hate to say it, the world is not a love fest, right? National security and strength of nation is important. And we're slowly going to get left behind if we don't change the overall mass.
Interesting. That's a great point. Dr. B, we're just about out of time. 2 thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you leading the charge on IP education and IP inspiration, because intellectual property is exactly what the name suggests. It's property of your intellect. And there are 8 billion people on the planet, and we all have ideas. We all have thoughts, some good, some bad, doesn't matter. Those are your ideas and your thoughts. And much of the world is governed by intellectual property up to and including today. And so the average person out there should learn a little bit about this field called intellectual property. So the first thought is, I applaud you on your efforts to do that and share that out there. And then the second thought, don't confuse your socioeconomic status or your financial access to or ability or availability to not being able to participate in the intellectual property space. Your ideas are your ideas, and there are all kinds of programs of safe spaces to meet people, share your ideas, and if it's something that's intellectual property gettable, if I can invent a term, you'll have access to be able to do that. So don't be discouraged by your position and station in life. If you have a great idea, the world will benefit from hearing about it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. B, for being with us today and making the time, and keep up the incredible work with you and your team are doing at COSI. And I'm going to look for your TV series. How many years has it been on?
So we did 2 years on the TV show, and we're going in our third year for our animated series. We won 4 Emmys for the TV show and 5 Emmys for the animated series.
Where can it be seen, by the way?
You can go to COSI.org, COSI.org, and just scroll down, look for QED with Dr. B or Dr. B in 3. You'll find it. It's right there on the first page. You'll be able to access it. I will personally send you some links, though, so you can share that at some point when you post the podcast.
Understanding IP Matters is brought to you by the nonprofit Center for Intellectual Property Understanding with the generous support of its partners and sponsors. Gain access to all 4 seasons by subscribing for free on your favorite platform or email us at explore.understandingip.org. Content conveyed is for informational purposes only and does not represent the views of CIPU or its affiliates. This episode was produced by Jack Shields for Wild Creek Studios. Thank you for listening.